Hey everybody, what's going on? And welcome to Guns N' Roses Central. And today I want to do a book review of this book called Guns N' Roses FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the Bad Boys of Sunset Strip. It's by Rich Weidman, and this book came out I think late last year, so it retailed for $19.99 US. If you're in Canada, it's about 24 bucks Canadian. And I picked it up about a week ago, and it's about 316 pages, give or take. And I was curious to do a book review about this. I kind of held off for a bit because I wasn't sure what to expect, but I heard from some of my subscribers that they read it and they enjoyed it. So there's a whole FAQ series on a variety of topics, including other bands and other pop culture topics. So I've never read any of the other FAQ books, but I assume they're probably laid out the similar way. So my impression before I started reading this book is that it's just going to retell the story of Guns N' Roses from start to finish. But I have to give the book some credit because it kind of goes in a different direction. It's not necessarily an A to Z kind of book. Each section is sort of split out into different topics of Guns N' Roses. So the book starts out by talking about some of the band members and their history and how they sort of found each other in LA, which everybody kind of knows the whole story about. And then it goes on to actually talk about some trivia. But one thing I really liked is that they talk about some of the early bands, go into a little bit more detail about that stuff. They talk about some of the actual early gigs that Guns did, or at least some of the venues that Guns have played. So they go into a lot of detail about those venues that are well known in Guns N' Roses history, like the Troubadour and the Whiskey and the Stardust. And then they talk about some bands that influenced Guns N' Roses, so it goes through all that kind of stuff. And then they go on to proceed and they talk about Hollywood landmarks associated with Guns N' Roses. So you can tell it's not like it's not your typical Guns N' Roses book. It's sort of approached a different way. And then they talk about some of the late night appearances that Guns N' Roses have done. They talk about some of the feuds that the band's been involved with. There's a couple sections I felt like were kind of bloated and sort of unnecessary and just felt like filler. Like they have a whole section on bands like Guns N' Roses have influenced. So they talk about bands like Hinder and Fall Out Boy. But I mean, like when you listen to Fall Out Boy's music, you don't really hear a lot of Guns N' Roses influence, especially their newer stuff. They also talk a lot about, Guns N' Roses side projects. It talks about the other books that have been written about Guns N' Roses. So it's not so much a biography as it is just a bunch of information about the band. There's also timelines in the actual book. So they talk about the Chinese Democracy Tour. They talk about some of the other tours, and they talk about the notable events that happen on those tours. They also go into some detail about the songs off their albums. So they have sections about each album, and they talk individually about each song. And while this is good, it's a little disappointing too, because I've done these true story episodes, and I generally have way more information on these songs than what's presented in this book. I did learn a couple tidbits of information that I didn't really know before that I got to give the book some credit for. But I also found that there was a handful of mistakes, both factual mistakes as well as spelling and grammatical mistakes too. So it's a bit sloppy in some respects. Also, there's some black and white photos in the book, but none of these photos are really rare. I mean, you could probably find a lot of these on Google if you look hard enough. But overall, I found the book is a decent read if you just love Guns N' Roses and want to consume anything related to the band. But if you're hoping to learn a lot of new stuff, you're probably going to be disappointed with this book. There's no interviews with any of the band members. This author basically just searched the internet and found facts and then just assembled them in a book. So I'd probably give the book a 3 out of 5. I think it's worth checking out maybe if the price goes down a bit. But if you're expecting an extensive biography, this is not the book for you. But I am looking forward to reviewing another book that came out around the same time as this one called Guns N' Roses, The Life and Times of a Rock and Roll Band. So I'm hoping to pick that up in a couple weeks and do a review in the next month or so. But if you guys have read this book, let me know what your thoughts are. And if you guys have The Life and Times of a Rock and Roll Band biography, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you love Guns N' Roses. And make sure you guys go to gnrcentral.com to stay up to date on the latest Guns N' Roses news. Take care.